So, if you would like to hear a review on Instructions for a Heatwave by Maggie O'Farrell or Station 11 by Emily St John Mandel, then you are in the right place. Stay with me and find out what I thought about these books. Welcome back to Bookish Brummie. My name's Mel and today we're going to be reviewing two books that I recently read on holiday. So the first one that we're going to get into is Instructions for a Heatwave by Maggie O'Farrell. So I'm sure you can agree that this front cover is really pretty and it definitely gives off holiday vibes. So I bought this one a couple of months ago and I was saving it purposefully for holiday because obviously with all the little sunbathers in the swimming pool, it gives off like perfect beach vibe to it. So this was published in 2013 and it sort of sits in the historical fiction category and family drama. And the story is set in 1976, which was during a massive heat wave in the UK. So our family sort of originate from Ireland, like the parents originate from Ireland. The family's called the Riordans, but they've been living in London for all of the time of their children's lives. So their children, there are 3 children who are adults. They've only ever lived in the UK, but they have been on holiday to Ireland many times when they were children. So what I really like about this family dynamic already to begin with, you've got mum and dad and then you've got the 3 adult children. As I say, that they're sort of originating from Ireland, so you've got this big Irish family who are living in busy London in the 70s during this heatwave. Now the story starts off with the head of the household, which is Robert Riordan, the father, and he essentially just says that he's going to go out to the shop and he's just going to go get some stuff from the shop. However, he never comes back from the shop. So his wife, Greta, she sort of rings her children and is like blabbering on about many things in the day and then just kind of says, oh, but your father hasn't been home since this morning. And all of these adult children are living split up all over the place. So I think one of them is actually living in America and another 2 are living in the UK, but they've got like quite busy lives. And, you know, the one tells her, oh, can you call so-and-so instead because I'm busy? So all of the children are really busy and they're not really paying attention to begin with about what their mother's telling them, because their mother's not saying, I'm worried your father didn't come home. She's sort of telling them about, you know, inane stuff that doesn't really matter, and then kind of slipped in the fact that their father hadn't come home. Eventually one of them picks up on this and he's like, oh my god. So he sort of goes home and then he calls his sister, his one sister who's living in the UK, and he was like, you need to stop what you're doing, dad hasn't come home, we need to find out what's going on. So the 2 of them that are living in the UK at the time, they go back home to London to be with the mother. And then there's like all the family, friends and neighbours have come round to the house, and you know, a couple of days passes and everybody's sort of aware that their dad Robert has gone missing. And you know, they've been trying to get hold of the other daughter who is living in, I think it's New York, but she's definitely living in America, to try and get hold of her. However, there is a feud going on between her and her sister. So we sort of have this one feud going on in the family, but then obviously the bigger thing that's going on is the fact that the dad has gone missing. So, you know, the question is whether she will also come over to the UK and how she will behave with her sister. So automatically you can see where the family drama is here, and then, you know, you've got the spouses of the other 2 that are in the UK and what's going on with them and their children. And they're all trying to deal with this while at the same time as trying to answer the question as to where their father has been. Now, I really enjoyed this book. It's the first Maggie O'Farrell book that I've ever read, and I definitely want to read more. Now, I did buy one from Book 66 the other week, and I have since been on a trip to London and also bought another one. So yeah, I honestly think that from the way that she wrote all of her characters and her prose in this, and just even the way that she strung the story together, it had really good pacing. It was just really an enjoyable read, and I really enjoyed all of the characters that she presented in this novel. I thought she wrote their backgrounds really well, the relationships between them really well. I just thought everything about it was like really good. And one of the parts of this book that I really appreciated was, we're talking about back in the 70s, before the idea of understanding, you know, certain neurodiversities. It wasn't really a concept in social consciousness to really understand them. And one of our characters is what we would recognise now as dyslexic, but nobody knew that terminology, you know, like back back in the 70s. And so this person is like trying to struggle through life with dyslexia. So we're also kind of seeing that aspect from one of the characters. And for me, that was really telling and really heartbreaking. And I feel like, you know, obviously Maggie O'Farrell must have written this character from an experience probably of somebody in her life that had actually gone through that in the 70s, because you just didn't have all of the support or the understanding or even the knowledge that this was a thing. You know, like back then people just thought you were stupid if you could read or write to the standard that everybody else was, and that's clearly not the case. So there's quite a few things going on here. You've got like the family drama, the family relationships, and then you've got this one character that clearly has dyslexia but doesn't know that, and nobody really understands that, and how that's actually affecting their life quite majorly. You've obviously got the drama of what is going on with the dad, and then you've got family secrets that none of the children know, that the mum is kind of like aware of but sort of drip feeding in every now and again. You know, and then the secrets that the dad has from the rest of the family. And I just thought that this was really, really great. I actually think that this would probably make quite a good film if they ever made a film of it. I don't think that they ever have, but yeah, if you sort of like family drama and historical fiction with family drama, I really think that you would enjoy this, and I'm actually really looking forward to reading some more Maggie O'Farrell in the future. So I think that I would probably rate this at a 4.5. The only reason that this is not quite getting to a 5 is, although I really, really, really enjoyed this, I've had a couple of 5-star reads this year, and this one didn't give me the feeling quite there at a 5, but I was definitely engaged in this book, definitely engaged with this author, and wanting to read more of her stuff. So let me know in the comments down below if you've ever read this one, or if there's any other Maggie O'Farrells that you would, you know, recommend. Because I say, like, I definitely think that her backlist is now one that I want to get into. So the other book that I read while I was on holiday was Station 11 by Emily St John Mandel. Now, I actually picked this one up in the airport from the bookshop in the airport on the way out, because they had a buy one get one half price offer. And I've heard quite a lot of people talking about this book and raving about this book, and a couple of people in my book group said that they had read it for book group before I'd actually joined book group, and quite a few people in there had enjoyed it. So it was one that I wanted to read because I've just started to get into science fiction, but I also really enjoy dystopian novels, and this is like post-apocalyptic dystopian novel. So, you know, I thought I really should get round to giving this a go. I've never read any of Emily St John Mandel's other work, so yeah, this was the first one for me. So this was published in 2014, so only a year later than Instructions for a Heatwave by Maggie O'Farrell. And this actually did win the Arthur C. Clarke Award in 2014 or 2015. So the Arthur C. Clarke Award is a UK award, like British award, that's given to what they consider to be the best science fiction novel that was first published in the UK, basically. And it has to have been in the last year. So this obviously did quite well when it came out, because obviously it won awards, but it was also made into a mini-series on HBO, which I've never watched. I don't know if that series is still available to watch, but at the time I think everybody was really, really enjoying this book, and I think the mini-series came out just after the book had been published and won awards. So you'll have to... we don't really get HBO in the UK, I don't think. Maybe people who have Sky package do, I'm not sure. But in America, I think that's like an American network. So you'll have to let me know in the comments down below if you've seen this or if it's still available to watch. So basically, as I said, this is a post-apocalyptic dystopian speculative fiction novel, I would say. Although it won a sci-fi award, it's not hardcore sci-fi. I wouldn't class it as hardcore sci-fi, I don't think, going into it. But essentially, we start off with a character called Arthur Leander, who is an actor. And he's an older man, and he ends up dying on stage during a show that he is doing. And basically, the point of his death is just right on the cusp as we are going into a flu pandemic. So this is mainly set in Canada, North America, but we can assume that this pandemic spreads out to the rest of the world, although we never really find out, and we assume it does. And we don't know if Arthur died from this flu pandemic or if he died from something else, but again, we assume that he did. But Arthur kind of is a central character, so even though he literally dies on page 1, he's a central character in this book, because what this book does is in the events, like the aftermath of his death, we then basically jump into the future by about 20 years, and we are now, all of our characters are in the aftermath of this flu pandemic, and it's about the state of the world like 20 years later, what has actually happened to civilization, what they're all doing, and we follow this girl called Kirsten, who had been an actress on the stage with Arthur, but she had only been a child at the time in the play that he died in, so she doesn't have much memory of him. But we essentially are now following her, where she's like, I suppose she would be about 20 years old, like 19, 20 years old. So that's the first link that we have to Arthur, is this little girl. But it's more than that, because essentially we reminisce back on Arthur's life, and essentially the characters, well, not characters, the people in Arthur's life, like his ex-wife, his friends, people that he worked with, you know. So whilst Arthur is not alive, there is a constant discussion of Arthur in the past, the people he knew, and then the people he knew's relationships with Arthur. And essentially, you know, some of those really, like, people exist in the post-pandemic world. Now, I have to admit, like, for the first half of this book, I did struggle a little bit, because I feel like this story meanders quite a lot. It's not really that succinct, you know, because as I said, you sort of have a couple of characters in this future post-apocalyptic world, and then you're like flashing back to, you know, the noughties, when Arthur is, you know, alive, and then, you know, his life maybe in the 90s and the noughties, or, you know, and it's a bit like, well, what has this Arthur guy really got to do with what's going on in the future? So that is a little bit confusing at first, but I think as the story unfolded as the book went on, I think that essentially Arthur is used as a starting point, like his death is used as a starting point, but then it's used as a reference point to look back in the past, you know, how the world was, how life was, how people were able to live before this pandemic actually happened. And there's this one scene that I actually really liked, that I thought was really interesting, and there's these parents talking about how they were trying to educate their children in this post-apocalyptic world, and one of the children had got upset because they'd found out that the life expectancy was way beyond 65 years old in the old version of the world. Obviously, the new version of the world, they don't necessarily have all the medication or electricity or equipment that, you know, existed in the old world before the pandemic hit, and that's really upsetting. And so the parents are talking about, well, I don't know whether or not we should really tell the children about the old world and the old knowledge that we had, because it upsets them. And I thought that was quite interesting, because I was just like, oh, but if you don't talk about it, how will you ever gain the knowledge back? So I thought that was quite an interesting point, and probably quite a good talking point as well. Like, if you were in a post-apocalyptic world and you were trying to raise children who had never lived in the before society, would you educate them about the previous society? I don't know, like, my feeling is that that would be important in order to try and regain, you know, knowledge of the things that were lost, because if you sort of don't talk about it and pretend like it doesn't exist, then, you know, are you making it harder to, yeah, as I said, like, remember knowledge that you had that sort of made society easier to live in, let's say. So that was one thing so I feel like in this book there were some interesting conversations where you sort of try to put yourself in the shoes of the character, and you try to think, okay, well, what would I do in that situation? And the fact that this was written in like 2014 about this pandemic flu, like way before the COVID virus obviously hit the world. Again, it's kind of scary in a way because it's almost like, you know, it was like a predictor of it. But fortunately for us, after the COVID pandemic, it did not end up in the situation that the characters find themselves in Station 11. So, yeah, I enjoyed the questions that this book sort of raised for me with regards to, you know, socially and morally, maybe what would you do if you were in this post-apocalyptic world. And I did enjoy looking back on Arthur's life. I thought that this was nicely written, so I thought that, you know, you were drawn into the characters, but as I said, it was a bit meandering for me, and there were points in the first half, I think, where I was thinking, like, what is the point of this? How is this all going to come together? Now, I did enjoy the ending. I enjoyed the way that the ending was pulled together, but I didn't feel like, maybe there just wasn't enough action in this book for me. There wasn't enough threat in this book for me, because essentially the pandemic is basically already happened, and now they're reflecting on life, living in life after the pandemic and reflecting on life before the pandemic. So the actual pandemic itself is not, we're not really living through that in this book, like only in very small bits where people are just sort of remembering what they were doing before they decided to leave their apartments and see what actually existed in the world after a couple of weeks. Like, that's the only real look that we get at the, you know, the actual pandemic itself. So I don't think that I would score this as highly as some of the other books that I read in March. I'd score this a 3.5. I think that, you know, was nicely written. There was some nice imagery. I can't say I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it, but it just wasn't fast-paced enough. I think I was expecting something a bit more fast-paced than this, and I just feel like I have read quite a lot of reviews of people really, really enjoyed this book, and then I've listened to people tell me how much they like this book and how I should read this book. And then when I actually read this book, I feel like it fell a little bit flat of my expectations. And that's, as I said, I just think it was a bit meandering for me. But if you like dystopian fiction and you're trying to sort of get round all the kind of main dystopian novels that people think that you should read, I mean, I definitely think that this is worth a read. It just wasn't a 5-star for me. So yeah, that's covering another 2 of the books that I'd read on holiday. So as I said, let me know in the comments down below if you have read either of those 2 books, because I'd be interested to know your thoughts on them as well. And, you know, maybe you've got some more insight into Station 11 than I've managed to get out of it. But yeah, let me know. And I will speak to you soon. I think next week I will give another review on the last 2 books that I read on holiday. Thanks for watching. Bye.